Ladies, gentlemen, and Haradrim of all ages, with the public beta for Diablo 4 wrapping up soon, I thought it would be a good time to talk about the classes. Yes, of course, we talk a lot about the classes, but it's just sort of the big thing right now. Even now to this point, the main thing that I see people talking about, that I see people questioning, is just wondering what class they actually want to play. The class that I'm playing is fun, but is there one I might enjoy more? The class I'm playing is good, but is there a better one, a stronger one? My class seems a bit weak. I wonder if there's one that's doing better that I would still enjoy. Well, today we're going to go through every class now that we have access to all 5, and we've played all 5 to level 25 and a little bit of content beyond that too, discuss their general class fantasy, how well they live up to that, and the various playstyles available to each one. Then at the very end, I will give you a general power ranking for the classes of how they're performing in the beta, so you know which ones are at the top when it comes to pure strength. Without further ado then, let's break on in here with the new classes to start off with, and begin with Druid. The Druid in the beta is a ton of fun. Its strength itself is extremely item dependent. It starts off pretty good, but as you get to level 15 and above, it starts to drop off pretty noticeably hard without having certain legendaries to fuel your builds, which is sort of sad, but once you do have those legendaries, it starts to feel really good once again. Aside from that though, the actual gameplay is really enjoyable. There are a number of potential playstyles and builds within the Druid that feel notably different from each other, whether it be a ranged playstyle based entirely around storm spells, a shape-shifting playstyle that focuses on werewolf, a similar one that focuses on werebear, or even a shape-shifting mixed bag where you swap back and forth between the two to activate some interesting bonuses. Past that, there's also a full companion build where you just get all of the followers possible and just blast through stuff with those, and that is surprisingly enjoyable too, as while you might assume that would make you a bit more hands-off, it is still a really involved playstyle. I quite enjoyed my time spent with the Druid this weekend, both getting to level 25 and the stuff that I did when I was there, and I think if any of those playstyles sound fun to you, you'll probably enjoy the Druid as well. Not to mention we don't have things unlocked yet like the key passives, which can be completely build defining, and then also of course the proper unique class mechanic in the spirit boons that provide permanent passive bonuses for Druid is just not active at all in the beta, as we can't get to the area that the quest is in, even though the technical requirement is just getting to level 15, so it will feel different in the main game even at this point. Past that, there is also the notable lack of crushing blow mechanic in the beta. In previous betas and in previous iterations of the Druid in Diablo, there was something called crushing blow attached to all earth spells. Every earth spell had its own chance to proc a crushing blow, and in Diablo 4 it was looking like crushing blow when procced would do a big chunk of damage that was maximum health percentage based, which would be absolutely nasty in the right situations and especially in single targets. So having that missing in this beta is definitely a big part of what has messed with the pure performance of the Druid. From what I've heard though, this will be in the full game. Blizzard is just running further balancing on it, but as it currently stands, you can definitely feel that something is missing. In general though, again, Druid is quite fun, so if they iron out what's missing, fix it up a little bit so it feels a little bit less item dependent, it'll be great in the full game release. Next up then, let's talk about the Necromancer, which is sort of on the opposite side of the spectrum in many ways. Necromancer is pretty unarguably overtuned in the beta. It is the best level 1 class by a landslide, and it doesn't really taper off at all. It has tons of strong abilities and lots of synergies available, and it essentially just feels plain nasty to use, which is, well, very accurate to the class fantasy of a Necromancer. There are multiple focuses that you can have and multiple ways to mix these. Things like using blood magic that heals you while it deals damage, bone magic on the more physical side of things, damage over time effects and curses, which is a concept, and of course the followers. You can build yourself to just have a massive army of friends all of the time, with by far the most summons any class can achieve. This is just the Necromancer class fantasy, and it arguably makes you feel more like a Necromancer than any other game that has Necromancers as an option. It's usually a class in games that doesn't quite feel like it hits the mark, it gets underdone, under-realized, but Diablo 4's Necromancer hits that sweet spot for sure. As well, it seems to function very similarly to Diablo 3's Necromancer in actual gameplay, so if you enjoyed that, you'll enjoy this too. It's worth talking about the Book of the Dead class mechanic as well, which lets you make more in-depth decisions about your summons, whether you want your Skeleboys to be more damage focused or tanky, and of course you get the War Mages too. The strongest build that I've seen so far for Necromancer is essentially just taking Blood Mist and making it trigger Corpse Explosion to reduce its cooldown, and just sort of being permanently immune while dealing thousands and thousands of damage like it's nothing. It's a ridiculous build, and it's not even the only strong build that I've seen available to Necromancer. Necro is just really good right now, so while personally I tend to go for class fantasy and feel over power when I pick what I play, if you just want pure power, Necro is probably the one to go to unless they do a hefty rebalancing. Thirdly then, let's touch on the Barbarian. This is your standard big boy melee with big weapons, lots of weapons, right up in the face of the enemy, tanking their attacks while doing massive damage. This one fits the class fantasy extremely well for a Barbarian. When you're playing the Barbarian, you feel like a Barbarian. Barbarian. You get to have 4 weapons equipped at any given time, a 2-handed bludgeoning weapon, a 2-handed slashing weapon, and 2 dual-wielded 1-handed weapons, of course, of your choice. Due to the arsenal system, each of these weapons gives you different bonuses as well when you have them equipped, which is really cool and adds quite a bit of thought to a system that at first glance just seems like, yes, I get to have a load of weapons. The actual builds vary from being mobile and having a semi-ranged attack, big bursty melee moves that apply bleeds, and of course the current top Barbarian build is the Thorns build, which is just silly. You go full in on Thorns, go for the abilities and passives that boost Thorns, and your Thorns number goes to over 1,000 easily, which just makes it so anytime an enemy hits you, they take that number in damage, which can combined with some tankiness and some single target damage skills to make it even rounded out, make it so nothing can really touch you without dying itself.
Why can't I touch you?
If what you want in life is just to feel like a big, beefy brick wall of a human being that can also dish out crazy damage, then Barbarian is a fantastic choice. It has decent mobility, so being melee focused isn't really much of an issue, and the tankiness allows it to take a bit more of the hits than most classes can without falling over dead. Not to mention that just walking around with 4 weapons on your back and attaching a different one to each skill that you use just looks freaking awesome in combat. With that then, let's talk about the Sorcerer. This is your classic fantasy wizard, and it lives up to that class fantasy as well as anything good. If you typically like magic wielders in video games, this is probably the one for you straight up. The Sorcerer focuses on elemental magic in Diablo 4, specifically cold spells, fire spells, and lightning spells. There's a bit of variation as you get further through the tree, but generally fire spells are about applying the burn debuff for some damage over time, ice spells are about applying chill, which slows enemies, and then also frozen, which stuns enemies, which is exactly as useful as it sounds. Then lightning spells are just your big AoE burst damage spells, your higher crit chance spells. Weaving all of these together both looks visually amazing on screen and feels really cool to do, but of course if you wanted to, you could just focus on building a single one of these elements as your main focus, and you'd still have a pretty great time. On top of this, a big class mechanic for Sorcerer is the enchantment, which allows them to pick any of their spells to essentially just activate passively periodically just due to their own magical prowess. The strongest example of this that I've seen so far is with Ice Blades. Ice Blades just sort of float around, attacking enemies for a few seconds, but the modifiers can make it apply cooldown reduction to any and all of your active spells, which makes them quite good even just for that reason. The enchantment on this makes it so every 20 seconds of cooldown that you activate, an extra pair of Ice Blades will spawn for free. Those Ice Blades apply cooldown reduction to your skills, and so it all just sort of fuels itself in a really fun way that lets you use your biggest attacks more often than you otherwise could. Sorcerer is exactly what it sounds like: big pops of magical damage, tons of crazy visual effects, and lots of fun. It's not even as squishy as you might think it is thanks to ice armor. It's just great all around. Then finally, let's talk about the Rogue. The class fantasy on this one is a dagger-wielding assassin, a bow-wielding ranger, and a trap-laying hunter all in the same package. The one thing that I have to say about it is that generally you have to pick between focusing the dagger gameplay or the bow gameplay. It doesn't really work too great to mix between each other, because simply one is melee and one is ranged, so that part of the class fantasy is a little bit missing to me, but the individual playstyles are still really fun to do on their own anyways. You can mix in traps with any of the playstyles, and the main thing about the Rogue, more than anything else, is its pure mobility. It has the most mobility of any class in the game, and so your gameplay just shows you dashing around the place like all hell, having a fantastic time. While most classes will either tank attacks or dodge them by just walking around, Rogue will almost always have some sort of mobile dash or dodge available to them, letting them just fully jump out of harm's way all the time, so it's entirely based on your own reaction time. They are a little bit squishy, so basically the class relies on your reaction time to survive, which is a really cool and different way to play compared to the other classes, and also of course rewards you for doing so. So if that sounds like fun to you, then Rogue is definitely one to consider. Pretty much all the best builds that I've seen for this class have been focused around shadow imbuement, which lets you apply shadow damage with various skills, making it so enemies will pop when they die, creating an explosion that hits anything nearby. Whether it be a bow build with penetrating shot or an impaling daggers build, they all have this in common. So if you like watching your enemies explode on death, which then causes other enemies to explode on their death, then just chain wipe an entire group in a single attack, this is a pretty solid way to go about it. All in all, if we are talking class fantasy, if we're talking fun factor, I think all of the classes are extremely close together. They are all really enjoyable, and the big important thing here is that they all feel notably different from each other. So all you have to do is consider how you like to play in games like this, consider what class fantasy sounds the most enjoyable to you, and you'll probably have a great time if you match that to the classes available. That said, that is how I usually make my own decisions, by what I think I will have the most fun playing. But I know there are loads of you out there who prefer to think about it from a pure strength and power power standpoint and want to make your decision based around how strong something is. I will say to remember that this is the beta and everything here is subject to balancing, but let's give it a proper ranking as far as this beta goes. Necromancer is at the top, there is no doubt about it. It literally has a build that causes screen wipes in a second and kills bosses silly quickly, while also being straight up immune to damage. You cannot beat that, there's just no way. On top of that, this is only one of the many builds that I've seen for Necromancer so far that have been topping the charts, so to say. They just seem really strong right now, and stronger than any other class is realistically. Then we have Sorceress second. Sorceress has tons of options, multiple really strong builds, great defensive options, great damage, some great mobility choices, and also really good CC application, but mostly it just does a butt ton of damage. Not quite as much as Necromancer, but a close second, and it does that while being ranged as well, which is an advantage worth actually considering, as it requires a bit less effort in dodging attacks while still being able to do a lot of damage. Third up, I would put Barbarian right now. The damage they can do is absolutely meaty. Their tankiness is a massive factor too, letting them absorb loads more punishment than the other classes can, and that Thorns build that I mentioned earlier is just plain silly. Nothing survives attacking you, not to mention when you're attacking them as well. Fourth, I'm putting Rogue. It's in a decent spot, and I'd say aside from Necro at the top, the rest of these classes are all relatively close to each other in ranking, so don't be too put off by this list. It's just sort of trying to gauge their strengths and weaknesses currently. Rogue is decently strong, but the best wave clearing builds struggle with boss killing, and the main reason for this is imbuements being so important for Rogue. Shadow imbuement makes it clear waves like nothing, but Shadow imbuement doesn't do a whole lot for bosses aside from the modifier that makes things take more crits when under 35% health with Shadow on them, which just isn't a whole lot for an extra skill slot. Rogue is strong, it just has to choose a bit more between its wave clear and its boss damage. Then in the last slot we have Druid. I think if a Druid is fully, completely built, ideal legendaries in every slot, Druid is definitely as strong as the other classes and probably outdoes some of the ones I put above it, but without being fully slotted, it just feels weaker. Your kill time on waves isn't the best. It isn't bad by any means, but it is beat by the other classes, and when it comes to bosses it can be a bit middling too, with some builds being a bit of an exception. Hopefully on launch we'll have Crushing Blowback though, and it will alleviate all of these issues, because currently it does just feel like something is a bit missing from Druid, and it's probably specifically that, Crushing Blow. And that's it everyone, all the classes explained and talked about and then also ranked based on their pure power. If you care more about how a class feels than how it performs like I do, then just pick any one of them. The one that you're most comfortable with is the one that you'll have the most fun with at the end of the day, no matter what. So if that's the case, just go off of the information I've given you in the beginning section and choose the one that sounds like the most interesting one to you and see if it clicks. If it's power that you're after though, just go play Necromancer. It's a bit busted right now, so enjoy it while you can, because why not? I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned something as well. Like if you liked the video, subscribe with the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.